Welcome to Shepherd Village Senior Flicks. This is Ron Matheson, and I'm really excited about today's interview because I get to interview someone that I met in 2009, Avie Esakov, and Avie works with International Heritage Tours. Now that might not mean a lot to a lot of you, but it sure does to us here at Shepherd Village. In 2009, we took our first tour, pilgrimage tour to Israel, and Avie was the one who helped us put it together. And then we went in 2013, we went in 2018. In 2020, we had another trip planned, and COVID hit. We were going to go in the spring of 2020. It got pushed off to the fall, got pushed off to 2021, the spring, and then to the fall of 2021. Now we're in, what year is it? It's 2022, and we're going, right?
We're getting there.
May the 3rd to the 15th, you have us planned to fly out, and we're going to land in Israel. We're really excited about it. How does it look for possibilities right now for travel?
Well, at one point, I think in some of our discussions, I might have mentioned to you that once Israel reaches sort of like herd immunity with inoculation, that they probably would open up the country for unvaccinated tourists. Now, while Israel has done that as of the 1st of March, Canada, unfortunately, doesn't allow unvaccinated folk to get on a plane.
Right.
When Canada changes that, then, of course, everything will open up. Right. So right now, the restrictions have been eased quite drastically.
Right.
We're still required to do a PCR test within 72 hours prior to departure.
Right.
Another PCR test upon landing, and if I have it my way, it'll be a rapid PCR test where we get the results within 4 hours.
Okay.
So that's the 2 entry to Israel requirements, and then to return to Canada, I believe right now it's an antigen test that will be administered to the group at a place to be determined. Right. And there's a moderate cost for that I'll be informing you sort of like towards April.
Right. What I want to get at is, I mean, we're pretty much used to the fact that travel and restrictions, and it's all changing right now. But what does not change is what happens when we hit the ground. When we land in Tel Aviv, got to be one of the most beautiful cities, Ben Gurion Airport, just outside of Tel Aviv. You've been talking about a destination there, a garden, botanical garden, that we have not seen yet. In all the tours that I've taken, we have not gone there yet. And we've got this hopefully going to happen this time. Tell us a little bit about that garden.
So Neot Kdumim is a biblical botanical garden put together by Noga Reuveni, and the idea there is to try and expose everyone who visits the garden to the biblical flora and the impact that the Bible has on, for instance, botanical definitions that are common sense in Israel. We'll be arriving in Israel after the almond has already finished blooming, because the first of the trees to bloom is the almond. Oh. When you refer to the tree as an almond, it doesn't mean much.
Right.
But in Hebrew, the name of the tree is shaked, and lishkod is to be diligent. And sure enough, the first tree to blossom, diligent, is the almond.
Okay.
Oh, that's one example. The other example is, if I recall, there's Zacchaeus in Jericho. And he's a man who's exacted a heavy toll on the people of Jericho. And when he climbs up a sycamore tree, Jesus then greets him and I think stays the night.
Right.
Now, sycamore is meaningless. But the Hebrew word for sycamore is it's not a revelation, it's a change. It's a change of stance, and the sycamore is in the Hebrew word is a very well-known shikma. L'shakem is to renovate or to rejuvenate, and that's perhaps what happened and why that particular tree was the tree that Zacchaeus climbed up, and then Jesus embraced a man who then sort of like changed his perspective.
Right, right. Jesus walking along sees a little man called Zacchaeus.
Yeah.
And I can identify that with that being short. And I remember hearing all the songs about, in Sunday school about Zacchaeus. But we're going to see a tree that is basically, in the Hebrew, meaning a transformation.
Transformation,
and,
correct.
And Zacchaeus' life was transformed when he met Jesus. That's indicative of walking in the steps of Jesus throughout all of Israel, isn't it?
Yes, we're not doing anything unusual going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land.
Right.
Millions of people have gone to the land of everlasting promise for 2,000 years.
Right.
And millions will do so after us.
Right.
So the question is, when do we go
Right.
to walk in the footsteps of Jesus? And these kind of journeys are impactful. It's probably a life-changing journey for anyone who's gone there first time.
Right.
Because the meaning of the Bible is going to be so much different and so much more vivid once
Right.
you've walked where Jesus walked.
Right. I remember hearing about that and just sort of passing it off. Well, look, I can Google it, right? And I can read the books. I can get somebody else's story all about it. I can Google your home, or you can Google my home and my kitchen, and I can set it up so that you can have a Zoom and we can see what's going on. Very, very different when you actually walk in someone's home and you smell the smells that are the fragrances there. You interact with the comfort and the warmth of that home. And then you hear the stories and you see where those stories have been lived out. Well, that's sort of like landing in Israel. I read about Elijah, for example, and about Megiddo, but when I see it, it is transforming. And
well, you speak of Elijah, and as we travel north from Tel Aviv airport,
right.
and we travel along Mount Carmel, you get to realize the impact that short mountain range or small mountain range has on the
right.
geomorphology of the area. And then we head to Megiddo. And when you're standing on Megiddo and look out, you get to realize
yes.
why Megiddo is the Megiddo that we know, the land that apparently we're going to have the first of battles ever fought there, and the last battles of Armageddon will be fought there too.
Right.
And when you're standing on the mountain, you get to realize, it was a little hill actually,
yes.
you get to realize what it is and why it is so significant just by looking out over the valley. The Jezreel Valley is beautiful,
yeah.
and May, it's still going to be green.
I've got some really beautiful pictures of that area and the valley, and just looking over that and standing there, realizing there were over 20 civilizations that were actually built and lived in that one area. I think it's 20 to 26 or something like that. And
yeah, the layers of civilization in Megiddo are unique.
Right.
But then it's not only Megiddo that has that aspect. You go to most of the ancient archaeological sites called Tel
right.
in Israel, and you'll find something similar.
Yes. Now, our first day, going back to our first day when we land, and we'll be going through Jaffa or Joppa, and up the coast a little bit, and a couple of stories come to mind about Jaffa. What's the significance there?
So, Tel Aviv encompasses Jaffa as well,
right.
and Jaffa of the biblical Jaffa is Jaffa of Jonah and the whale.
Right.
It's Jaffa where Solomon had the cedars of Lebanon for the construction of the temple, landed there and docked there. Right. And it's also Jonah and the whale.
Yes, yes.
And then, of course, you have the healing of Tabitha in Peter's house. So right. Jaffa has a huge meaning. And then towards the beginning of the 20th century, new Jewish settlers coming as Zionists to the Holy Land decided to build a neighborhood outside the walls of Jaffa. And they called the neighborhood Tel Aviv, or the Hill of Spring. That's the new neighborhood.
Right.
And Tel Aviv today is sort of like the place that never sleeps kind of thing. It's like it's a miniature New York City, but with a whole lot more quality than New York has, because it's smaller.
Yes.
And so we'll be going through Jaffa, both Jaffa and Tel Aviv. Probability is, unless things change, that we'll be doing it on the bus.
Right.
Nevertheless, we'll make stops to make sure that one can clearly identify what it is we're experiencing as we drive through.
Right.
For instance, we go to Rabin Square. The Prime Minister of Israel was assassinated in that square, which then takes his name.
Right.
So we'll be driving through Old Jaffa, Old New Tel Aviv, and then New Tel Aviv before we leave, going north along the Mediterranean shore.
Right. Our first night where we stop, and I'm really excited about this, and I like what you've set up for us, a number of different places on this trip. You've placed us in some really special, unique settings. Our first night is in the Ramada Inn and Spa on the Mediterranean Sea, partway to Caesarea Maritima.
Correct.
Sun setting.
Over the Mediterranean. You're there for that. Yeah, sure.
Yes, yeah.
And if you want to, you take folks and go down to the beach.
Definitely, yes. And I want to. That's where we're headed. When we land, we're going to either probably grab something to eat and then go down. But we'll be down at the beach and watching the sunset. For those who haven't seen that, it's spectacular. And then our third day is our first full day trip, and we're leaving this resort. We're headed up through Caesarea and to the Galilee. Just identify a couple of really main points along the way that you think are pretty special for this trip.
So when we speak of Megiddo, when we speak of Caesarea,
right?
Caesarea is relatively young. It's 2,000 years old.
Right.
The main features that we visit are King Herod's time, just before Jesus. And of course, we have there Herod's palace, and in the backyard of Herod's palace, they discovered the praetorium with a jail. Well, if there's a jail found in Caesarea 2,000 years ago, both Peter and Paul were guests in that jail.
Right. Right.
And so it's very, very meaningful. Cornelius is the first convert, non-Jewish, to Christianity. And that too takes place in Caesarea.
Right.
And then you get to realize that Caesarea has no water. And so you travel a little bit further north of the Antiquities to see the massive aqueducts that King Herod built and then later were expanded as the population grew. So Caesarea is a major stop. It's an internationally renowned port in Jesus' day.
Right.
And so it's a very important location to stop at, to witness both the grandeur of King Herod's building,
right,
but also the footsteps of Paul and Peter through that same port town.
Right. We're headed from there, and a few different stops along the way, Nazareth being one, and Megiddo we've talked about, the burnt place, and where Elijah called down the fire from heaven, and then we're going to the overlook Mount Arbel. Then we're going to end up at Tiberias.
So Mount Arbel is very special in that it's one of the highest mountains overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And if we're talking seas, and we're talking Toronto and people from Toronto, there's a lake south of here that's called Lake Ontario.
Right.
There's Lake Michigan. Israel, the whole country, fits into Lake Michigan. So we've got 5 Great Lakes in North America.
Right.
And from the Arbel, when we look down, we're looking down at a glorious picture of the area of Jesus' ministry, including the Sea of Galilee. Now, anywhere else, that little body of water would be a pond. It's 32 kilometers wide. It's 18 kilometers long and 18 kilometers wide. Anywhere else, it's a pond. But it's not the pond that we're describing. It's the events of Jesus' ministry that make this a sea.
Right.
The unique thing about it is that when you're on the other side, the east side of the Sea of Galilee, very often at noon, starting from roughly May, it could be more towards mid-May than the beginning of May, there's a northerly wind that blows down the valley between 12 and 2 p.m.
Right.
And on the east side of that little pond, there are waves that are 2 meters high. And then as quickly as the wind blows down the valley, it settles inexplicably, maybe 45 minutes to an hour later, and water that was rough and wavy becomes placid, much like the miracle of the calming of the waters.
Right.
Now, Jesus from Nazareth, Nazareth being inland, wouldn't know much about the Sea of Galilee and the phenomenon. The
Right.
fishermen do. And so when Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat
Right.
and the storm breaks, they wake him up, otherwise he might drown.
Right.
But Jesus steps up. Nobody steps up in a fishing boat in the storm.
Right.
Jesus stands up and calms the water.
Right.
So these are the kind of events that will be magnified
Yes.
as you travel through the area.
Yes.
And then the next day we travel north
Right.
to an area that's also a combination of Old and New Testament,
Right.
and then Muslim and Crusader presence when we go up north.
When we're traveling north, the Damascus Road, you mentioned to me once that it changed a little bit. In '87, I believe, was my first trip with a friend of mine, Paul Filsinger, and I remember going up to the Golan Heights then, very different back in '87, and still military operations set up there, and you could see it was just very different. But I remember seeing an old castle. Castle
Correct.
Nimrod, I believe it is,
Yeah.
on the way up, thinking to myself, wow, caravans must have come from there, raiding the road to Damascus.
Going to Damascus. So what we do there, you'll be traveling onto the Golan Heights, which is a little different today. It still is a major military area.
Yes.
But there's a lot of Jewish presence in towns,
Yes.
villages, and
A lot of farming,
and
yes.
a lot of farming there.
Yes.
One of the industries that has just opened on the Golan Heights is making food out of locusts.
Really?
Very few people realize that locusts are kosher. And in the 1950s, when the Yemenite,
Do you
when there
have
was
to
a
have
locust,
chocolate with them?
well, the strange thing is that in the 1950s, when Israel was struck by swarms of locusts,
Right.
the Yemenites, who were regularly used to locusts, went out with big pots and pans, and they caught them to eat them.
Oh.
So they're making food out of locusts now on the Golan Heights.
Oh, wow.
You travel then and you continue to Dan,
Yes.
ancient Dan of
Yes.
biblical time, Genesis 14:14. Abraham probably walked through the mud brick gate that you'll see there.
Right, right.
And then as the military technology develops, the need for a walled city moves from Dan to Caesarea Philippi, upriver,
Right.
going a little east.
Right.
And then as battering rams and bow and arrows get more strength or distance, they then go up the hill and put a very looming castle at Kalat Nimrod. We changed hands tremendously.
Right.
I think that most of the time people are told it's Crusader, but the truth is that's a Muslim
Okay,
fortress that
yes.
was built there
Right.
and changed hands. Muslim
Right.
Crusader, Muslim Crusader, and then Muslim again.
Right. And most tours don't stop there.
At Kalat
but-
Nimrod? No,
right.
they don't.
But we will. We've got that on the list there for us.
So
Avie.
Kalat Nimrod is a wonderful location. The other location that is very significant and perhaps more significant today
Right.
for the Christian believer is Banyas or Caesarea Philippi.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now,
yes.
Banyas is called Banyas because in the Muslim, it's not dichotomy, enunciation, the letter P is pronounced like B.
B.
Since the Greeks put an altar to Pan, the god of fear, there,
Right.
later on in time, when Muslim take over the area, it's not Panyas, but it's Banyas. Caesarea Philippi is where the son, who inherited part of Herod's kingdom, would have his capital. And he was more favorable then Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas, we know,
Right.
and we'll be addressing Herod Antipas when you travel through Jordan.
Right.
But Herod Philippi was more of a accommodating to Christianity. Mind you, the city was a total pagan city.
Right.
And that's where Jesus has the confession of faith take
Right.
place, right there,
Right.
in the one place in all of Israel that is the most pagan that you can find anywhere.
Right.
That's where it is.
Right.
And for years, we knew of an ancient church from about the 5th or 6th century. When you turn left going in the gate off the road, it's on the right side of that very little entrance.
Right.
So about 18 months ago, maybe 20 months ago, start of COVID,
Yep.
they went to do some adjustment to a wall that's called the Wall of Niches, because there were 3 niches there. You might remember the cave.
Yes.
At Banyas.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a big hole. Yeah.
We're told in the Mishnah that the Jordan River started from the mouth of that very cave.
Right.
And so they went to do some adjustment to the niches of a 3-niche wall that was on the west side
Yeah.
of this pagan Pan area. And when they went and lifted up several of the blocks, and the picture will show that, you'll see all of a sudden a mosaic floor is found. And the mosaic is very typical of Byzantine churches, early Byzantine churches.
Right.
Like in the mosaics, you see small diamond shapes with a cross in them.
Yes.
This discovery tells us that Herod, who built 3 altars or temples to his mentor Augustus, one of which was in Caesarea Philippi, and the sign there still says that at the mouth of the cave is where he built the temple to Augustus. Well, we have to
Right.
look elsewhere, because we've discovered the church. The church is a 5th century church.
Right.
And in the wall of the church, there were 2 very unusual building blocks. One was a pagan altar that was dedicated by a man from Turkey and was used in secondary use in the construction of a wall that separated the church, the nave of the church, from perhaps an eating area east of that
Right.
wall.
Right.
And on the other, another building block in that wall is a massive stone with a whole lot of crosses on it. Wow. Now, Hieronymus, one of the historians who lived in the Holy Land, writes that there was a statue of Jesus and the woman that he healed from bleeding, touching the hem of his frock.
Right.
And in his day, all he could see was remnants of the silver that was used for that statue.
Wow.
But he mentions the statue,
Right.
and if that is the church from his time, in his day, then we're looking at the church at which that statue would stand. Either way,
Right.
it's 200 meters from this new discovery to the church that was discovered earlier.
Right.
So 2 churches in a pagan area, that's big time.
Right. And so just capturing some of what you're saying there, this is where the gods of the world, including the Roman gods, the Caesar, would have been recognized. And Jesus says, who do men say that I am? Mm-hmm. And Peter declares, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Well, okay, so Simon, who is the disciple that we know,
Right.
becomes Peter,
Yes.
and is upon this rock
Right.
that we'll have the foundation stone of Christianity.
Right.
So there's a whole big question. Where is that very rock?
Right.
Once the church is built at the mouth of the cave,
Right.
chances are that the looming rock that's in the cave might be the very rock that we're talking of.
Right. Right.
And so today one can't
Yeah.
go there.
Yeah.
Prior to the excavation, one could walk to that rock in the mouth of the cave.
Yes. I actually did that in 87.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Jordan River flows and flowed underneath
Right.
the church. There's a aqueduct that they found
Right.
that was in use for about 500 years.
Right.
And then there must have been an earthquake that lowered the level
Right.
of the aquifer.
Yeah.
So that today when you're walking up to the cave, you walk across a little pathway, and the water is flowing underneath you, not at the mouth of the cave, about 50 meters from the mouth of the cave.
So it's in this setting, and it's one of the most fascinating settings for a Christian to stand there in this pagan area where Jesus, with his disciples, is declaring himself and as the Messiah, and then to figure that there's a church there that recognizes that the woman with the issue of blood had reached out and been transformed there as well. A miracle that took place that again gave evidence of the miracles of Jesus. So we leave that site, and of course we're on Galilee. We're gonna do a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, and then we're headed up to Mount Nebo into Jordan. Now most trips. A lot of trips don't do that. They'll head back down to Jerusalem or so on. But we're going to hit Mount Nebo, and then we're going to go down to Petra. Just briefly highlight that.
So the unusual part of the journey that you're doing as a sojourn into Jordan would take you also to areas of biblical significance. Mount Nebo is perhaps one of the oldest of the mountains that we will encounter in the context of biblical connections. Because so far, if you speak about Genesis, that predates Dan. The gate of Genesis predates Moses. Moses at Mount Nebo is the next major site that we stop at. And then traveling into Jordan, one goes through the area of Edom and Moab that are so many times mentioned in the Old Testament. And one travels further past a place called Muhawir or Makairos, where Herod Antipas beheaded John. And so we have the contrast between Herod Philippi and Herod Antipas, one favorable and one not so favorable to the Christian faith. And then you head to perhaps one of the most remarkable wonders of the perhaps not only the ancient world, but the modern world as well. Because Petra is stunning. The morphology there it's just breathtaking. Walking through a gorge, very few people realize that the word gorgeous comes from a gorge like Petra, where we have these stunning hues of color in the rock. And then as you walk through this narrow gorge, all of a sudden, you get a first glimpse of a huge monument that was carved out of this, the hues of and the color of the stone, known as the Chesna or the treasury. And then the whole area of ancient Petra opens up, and you'll walk through most of the area of Petra that is commonly visited. One doesn't really visit the mountains on top of and around the little valley that opens up at the end of the gorge. But one can spend anywhere between 5 to 7 days just going up to mountaintops to see more and more of ancient Petra. Petra Nabatean, very, very significant. Very significant also in the trade routes that came from the east going west. And Petra was a major station on that route. And then the more unusual thing is that rather than most of our tours that go into Petra come across at the Allenby Bridge north of the Dead Sea. And what we decided together was that we would take everybody to Etzion Gaver, perhaps the area where Solomon mined copper. And we'll do an overnight in Eilat, which is phenomenal as well.
A beautiful spot.
But again, if I was to say how many itineraries, not many itineraries that I have are doing Eilat. And so you started a little wave there that now I have 2 other churches doing as well. And so then you sort of like start traveling north, much like the copper in Solomon's day would go north. So you'll be traveling via Timnah to a kibbutz Ketorah, where an Israeli botanist took a handful of burned seeds from Masada, date palm seeds, planted these seeds, and one of them sprouted into a tree that we called Methuselah, and Methuselah is the father of Abraham. So we have a tree today that's male,
Right.
Because the only way to get a female tree is from the offshoot from the palm itself.
Oh.
You can,
Okay.
germinating from a seed, it's
Right.
going to be male. The issue is that we can now combine there's like a dust, a powder that this tree will generate, and you can fertilize modern date palms, female, with the same spur from a 2,000-year-old tree, and today they're actually producing dates that rely on the spur from that tree that is a 2,000-year-old date.
There's a lot of agriculture in the desert. The desert, the Negav, it's just fascinating in terms of watching it come alive with the greenery now and the vegetation that they've been able to do. We'll be traveling through there. We'll be doing Masada, but first we're traveling through the Negav.
When you travel through the Negev, which probably together with the Judean desert make up 2/3 of Israel's landmass.
Right.
So we're talking desert, and we're talking the greening of the desert mainly because Israel today doesn't have a major water problem, mainly because we have desalinization plants.
Yes, yeah, I saw some of that.
We now are utilizing brackish water, that is the subterranean water of the Negev, to produce crop in the Negev. And surprisingly, you take something like a melon that's grown in the Arava, when you use brackish water, the melon comes out a whole lot sweeter because it's combating the salt in the water that it's getting fed. So it's an interesting concept. When you travel through the Negev, you're going through the heart of the Negev to Maktesh Ramon. And Maktesh Ramon is the largest erosion crater in the world today. And the geology there is outstanding.
Yes, absolutely.
So driving through it, you'll get to experience the descent into the Maktesh, and then the winding road that'll take you out of the Maktesh.
Right.
You'll stop and turn around and take a look at the route that you've come on, and you don't see the end of the entry. That entry to the Maktesh Ramon from the southern side, when you stand at the top of the Maktesh, this crater, you don't see the southern entrance from where you're standing.
Right.
It's so significant.
Wow.
Avdat is another Nabatean area that is connected to the trade routes from Petra, which you visited the day before.
Right.
And so all of this ties in the context. I would say that we're talking about something like biblical trade routes, and then trade routes that continue later in time, because those trade routes continued throughout time, and they're still there today.
Yes. There was a large Christian community that was built at the end of one of those trades.
Yes. Avdat, there are 3 locations that had a Christian community, Nabatean, then Christian. And then you travel north and you head towards Jerusalem.
Well, we're going to head to the Dead Sea first.
Oh, yes, of course.
And we're going to be staying at a nice resort that you've picked out for us there, a spa on the Dead Sea, and relaxing the morning there as well.
Sure. Since you're arriving at night, you and I discussed earlier today that maybe we add the sound and light show at Masada as an option for that night.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty cool way to get an introduction to Masada from the other side, because it's a side that you're going to see from the top of Masada, and when you go to the sound and light show, it's the side that you're going to see because you're visiting it.
Right. Yeah.
So we'll add that and see that how that pans out.
Yeah.
Masada becomes a cornerstone in modern Zionist history as well.
Right.
Because the slogan of the modern Zionist country, known today as Israel, is that Masada will never fall again.
Right.
Israel will be and can be always there for a Jew anywhere who needs to get out and go someplace. We didn't have that option in the Second World War. Had there been an Israel, we wouldn't have the terrible Shoah, the Holocaust that happened. Because initially, Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews and get them out of Europe. Right. But there was nowhere for Jews to go. So Israel is that significance of Masada and the battle and the discovery of Masada was very, very, very significant.
Right.
Lately, in archaeological excavations done at Masada and Herodion, they found evidence of a winery, possible winery on Masada.
Wow.
In other words, they were growing grapes on a place that has 1 day of rain a year.
Right.
But Herod built a massive dam and directed water to the mountaintop.
Wow.
And that water produced grapes. Now, you might have a problem with brackish water that's in a cistern, but when you drink wine, there's no stomach disorder that goes with the wine. There is a stomach disorder that goes with bad water.
Right.
And so wine was a huge issue 2,000 years ago and before.
Yes.
So Masada and Herodion have the same context. The discovery has been made in both.
Right.
From there, you head up out of the valley.
Right.
The lowest place on earth. You head up to Jerusalem, which is probably one of the highest points of the Judean mountains that we visit.
Yes. Jerusalem in and of itself could be a tour by itself. It's just absolutely fascinating. But you are living the final days as well of Jesus' life and ministry, and that of the disciples. And I remember Thomas, Jesus saying he was going up to Jerusalem for the Passover, and the disciples saying no. Then finally, Thomas saying, "Well, fine, we'll go and die with you." And when we get there, just highlight 3 or 4 of the places that we'll be visiting there, that just any solid Christian who actually has an opportunity to go shouldn't pass it down, because it is life-changing.
So there probably are 3 or 4 locations where you could say this is biblical.
Right.
Okay. Jerusalem as a city, from the Temple Mount going south and going west, is all part of the fabric that the Judeo-Christians knew 2,000 years ago, that the Jews knew 3,000 years ago.
Right.
And so Jerusalem is, the city itself is a biblical city. When one stands on the southern steps, on the south side of the Temple Mount, and we're looking at the substructure and the picture that I can show you of that substructure, one sees that there were 2 gates on the southern wall, and one of those gates is standing on bedrock with steps leading up to the gate.
Right.
Well, if you've got steps leading up to the gate that's 2,000 years old, and Jesus entered the temple from an area that has ritual purification right there, then that would be the most convenient route to follow, particularly since the Pool of Siloam is mentioned in Jesus' day as well. And coming from that south route, one actually has discovered today the stairs that led from the Pool of Siloam in the city of Jerusalem north over 1 kilometer long. Stairs that lead and led to the Holy Temple. And so purification is going to be huge to go and attend any service on the Temple Mount. So in Jerusalem, those southern stairs, King David's city, and the archaeological excavations that have been discovered there, one area used to be a parking lot, and it's known today as the Givati area, because in one of the terrorist attacks, a platoon of soldiers were coming to swear in at the Western Wall were attacked, and so it became known as the Givati parking lot. So when you have a parking lot in an ancient city, it's a gold mine for excavation, because there's nobody living there. When you excavate underneath the Western Wall, in the Western Wall tunnels, which you will be going through, another what I call, it's like a little bit of whipped cream on strawberries. Okay, so you've had the strawberry, you've been to the southern wall. Now you're going to walk under the city, along the wall that Jesus might have walked along us himself.
Right.
Under the city. So you're excavating underneath a city that's thriving and living above you. And in David's city, we have a very similar circumstance. That those stairs that we have from Siloam going up to the Temple Mount, they're under the city, and the city's being lived in.
Right. Yes.
So that parking lot was huge in the context of excavation. The area just south of the Temple Mount, huge in the context of excavation and First Temple and Second Temple time discoveries. Then in Jerusalem, the city itself is unique in that there's a fabric of religion that you just cannot avoid. All three monotheistic religions have a center there.
Right.
So whether you are a fan of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the Garden Tomb, in both cases, we're talking about the area that the tomb could possibly have been in.
Yes.
Likely, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with a close to 2,000-year history, is perhaps the, with a capital T, place of the tomb.
Right.
The niceties or the garden that one reads of in the New Testament is not available at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because the church was built 1,600 years ago.
Yes, right.
So if you built the church 1,600 years ago because the garden was there, then possibly we're talking the place, and for 2,000 years, pilgrims have gone to that location to venerate the tomb of the burial and the resurrection of Christ.
So we'll be there, and then we will be in the Garden Tomb.
You'll be in the Garden Tomb.
Yes.
The Garden Tomb itself is a very interesting outcrop of rock, which is within the city third wall, which is just before the Jewish revolt, which would be just after Jesus' day.
Right.
And so if there's burial there, chances are we're looking at a tomb that might be the tomb of Jesus.
Right.
In archaeological context, and it's very difficult to talk to somebody who believes the Garden Tomb is the place and say, listen, archaeologically, it's a First Temple time tomb. It was modified at a later stage. But that archaeology doesn't touch the heart.
Right.
The heart goes with the belief.
Yes.
So there's the wall and the entrance to the Garden Tomb. And there's a little alleyway that leads up to that Garden Tomb. On the left side of that wall is the French School of Archaeology.
Right.
And it took an Israeli doctorate student, Gabi Barkai, and you might be familiar with Gabi, who went into the backyard there to study the tombs that they had labeled Second Temple, to show them that what they have in the backyard is First Temple times tombs. And it's the same rock face that goes through the Garden Tomb. The history of that location is about 180, 200 years old, maybe 250 years old. When a fellow Gordon was in an inn and looking out, he saw what he thought was the skull-shaped rock, which is right there. And so you'll spend time there, mainly because there's far less hustle-bustle of the city around you. Like in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you'll have time for prayer and communion right there.
Yeah, we'll do a devotional time there, which is always meaningful. You know, the Mount of Olives, you know, the garden, there, we'll be up there and spend some quiet time. I remember doing that with the group, and just how meaningful it is as well. We're really excited. Really looking forward to it. One of the things I wanted to do on this trip, I remember my first trip, as I said, in '87, and we didn't get to a lot of those places. And then when we went in 2009, it was just sort of an introductory look at Israel. And we missed a lot. We didn't go to Petra. We didn't go to Mount Nebo where Moses looked over. And I thought, if I'm going to take a trip, I want to put together a trip where if you've been before, you'll find it fascinating. If you've never been before, you're going to say, look, I've captured pretty much most of it. I've been to the west, the east, the north, and the south of Israel, and I've been to the north and down through the south end of Jordan, you know, from the context there, and walk away and say, wow, I've really got a sense of it. How well did we do?
Well, I would say that the tour is full of little highlights that we don't have on many of our typical tours.
Right.
And so, yes, somebody who's been before can glean a lot from this journey.
Right.
Somebody who has never been before will learn a ton from the people who have been and from the
Right.
first-time experience.
Right.
That first-time life-changing experience is something that is hard to describe.
Right, yes. it
Only
is.
somebody who's done it
It is. Yeah.
knows how it changes the way one understands and reads Bible.
It's true, yes. And it did that for me as it's done for others in the group. My nephew came in with us on our trip, I believe it was 2018. He had just started reading the Bible earlier that year. And when he got there, and this is a young man in his 20s, he just, in one of our discussions in the evening, which we will do, we'll recap some of the stuff that we've done in that day. He said, it really verifies everything that I've been reading and everything I believe. And it was really a highlight. So I want to thank you, Avie, for putting so much time into this. And I do apologize for those who've been trying to go with this on this journey. And it's put off. It wasn't our fault. We didn't cause all the havoc in the last 2 years, but we've been recipients of some of the change and adjusting that we've had to do. So thank you for continuing to work with us. And for those who would like to go with us, they can contact us at Shepherd Village, or they can contact you directly at International Heritage Tours as well.
I want to thank you and thank Shepherd Village for the patience that you've had for the last 24 months, because the 24 months is not something that we could have foreseen.
Right.
My son Daniel was bar mitzvahed on the 7th of March of 2020,
Right.
and on the 8th of March, everything got locked down.
Right.
And so we were lucky to have a bar mitzvah like a bar mitzvah should be,
Right.
as opposed to a Zoom bar mitzvah, which
Right.
came for 24 months.
Right.
I want to thank you guys for the patience, and I want to thank you guys for working diligently to get the people to actually follow you,
Right.
to walk where Jesus walked.
yeah.
It's a remarkable experience.
So if you're listening in with us, Avie and myself, we invite you to join us on this tour. It is a pilgrimage. It is something that will definitely change your life and impact you in a very positive way. And feel free to follow up with us. We'll leave the information for you to contact us. Thank you.